A high school senior from Alabama named Natalee Holloway disappeared in 2005, and for nearly 20 years, her case remained one of the most heartbreaking mysteries in modern history. At first, police in Aruba treated her case as a missing persons report, but very quickly, it turned into a criminal investigation. The island became consumed with the search for Natalee. People all over the world followed the story, and her family promised they would not leave without answers. What started as a tragic mystery eventually turned into a chilling truth that revealed an even darker reality than anyone had imagined. Natalee was only 18 years old when she traveled with 124 classmates to Aruba for their senior trip. It was supposed to be a week of celebration, a chance to relax and enjoy one last adventure before heading off to college. Natalee had so much ahead of her. She had earned a full scholarship to the University of Alabama, planned to study pre-med, and dreamed of becoming a doctor. She was known by everyone who loved her as kind, responsible, hardworking, and full of life. But that joyful trip ended in tragedy. On the final night, May 30, 2005, Natalee was last seen leaving a nightclub with 3 young men, 17-year-old Joran van der Sloot, who lived on the island, and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. They later told police they dropped her off at her hotel. But Natalee never returned to her room. Her packed luggage and passport were still there, untouched, the next morning. She was gone, without a trace. Almost immediately, panic spread among her classmates, teachers, and family. A massive search began across Aruba, involving local police, volunteers, FBI agents, and even island residents. Beaches, forests, and remote roads were checked. Dogs searched for her scent, planes scanned the island from above, and boats scoured the waters. But there was nothing. No clothes, no shoes, no phone, not even a single item Natalee had with her. The only people connected to her disappearance were the 3 young men she was last seen with. They were questioned and arrested more than once, but their stories constantly changed. First, they said they dropped her off at the hotel. Then they claimed she was left on the beach. None of their timelines matched, and their lies only made investigators more suspicious. Despite that, there was no solid evidence. No body, no eyewitnesses, and no proof of what actually happened. Each time the suspects were arrested, they were eventually released. Years passed, and the case stalled. Investigators had nothing. For Natalee's family, especially her mother Beth Holloway, the pain of not knowing was unbearable. Beth refused to stop fighting. She traveled repeatedly to Aruba, appeared on television, held press conferences, and even offered a $1 million reward for information. She begged anyone with knowledge to come forward, but no one did. Every false lead, every rumor, and every new lie only deepened her grief. As time went on, suspicion grew, not just around Joran and the Kalpo brothers, but also around the way the case was handled. Many began to believe that corruption and cover-ups played a role. Joran's father was a well-connected judge in Aruba, and some people thought the authorities were protecting him and his son. The suspects had been inconsistent from the beginning, yet they were released quickly, which only fueled doubts about whether justice was truly being pursued. Theories began to spread. Some people believed Natalee might have been killed that night, while others feared she had been trafficked or abducted. Whispers of connections to illegal activities surrounding Joran made the possibility of trafficking seem more real to many. There were even people who thought Natalee might still be alive, held against her will, or suffering from memory loss and unable to return home. For her family, especially Beth, those possibilities created a different kind of torment. They were desperate for closure but also clung to hope that Natalee might still be found alive. Beth Holloway became the face of the search for her daughter. She never gave up, chasing every lead, no matter how impossible it seemed. While the world slowly moved on from the case, Beth continued to fight. Her strength and determination kept Natalee's story alive for nearly 2 decades. Yet, what investigators would later uncover about Natalee's disappearance was far more disturbing and cruel than anyone had expected. In 2010, Beth Holloway faced another heartbreak when Joran van der Sloot, the man long suspected in her daughter Natalee's disappearance, contacted her directly. He told her he knew where Natalee's body was buried. But there was a condition. He demanded $250,000 in exchange for the location. Desperate for answers after so many years of pain, Beth agreed. She gave him the money, hoping this time she would finally learn the truth about her daughter. What Joran gave her instead was another devastating lie. He claimed Natalee's remains were buried under a building near the Aruba racket club. Investigators immediately checked his story. They looked at satellite images and construction records, but the truth was clear. There had never been a building there at the time Joran described. His entire story was false. Joran had exploited Beth's grief for money, knowing how much she needed closure. For Beth, this was more than just a scam. It was a cruel betrayal. She had already endured years of heartbreak and unanswered questions, but now the man she believed had taken her daughter was using her pain against her. He gave her hope, took it away, and left her broken all over again. This act of cruelty deepened her suffering and reminded the world of how far Joran was willing to go to manipulate others. Despite the lies, the search for the truth about Natalee continued. Her case remained in the spotlight, with media coverage, private investigations, and endless speculation. Everyone seemed to have a theory, but no one had the facts. For years, Natalee's disappearance was one of the most famous unsolved cases in the world. Her family was left in limbo, with no body, no evidence, and no closure. By 2012, 7 painful years had passed without answers. The Holloway family had held on to hope for as long as they could, but eventually they had to face a legal reality. An Alabama judge declared Natalee Holloway legally deceased. For her loved ones, it was a devastating decision. It didn't bring answers or peace, but it was an official recognition of the loss they had carried for so long. For Beth, it felt like letting go of the hope that had kept her going. But then, something happened that proved just how dangerous Joran really was. On May 30, 2010, exactly 5 years to the day after Natalee disappeared, another young woman lost her life. Stephanie Flores, a 21-year-old college student from Peru, was found dead in a hotel room in Lima. She had been full of promise, with a bright future ahead of her. Investigators soon discovered that she had spent her last night with Joran van der Sloot. Stephanie had reportedly found files on Joran's laptop connected to Natalee's disappearance, and that discovery may have triggered his violent reaction. Stephanie was brutally attacked, and after the crime, Joran tried to flee the country. He crossed into Chile but was quickly caught and sent back to Peru. This time, the evidence against him was undeniable. Unlike Natalee's case, there was no mystery, there was proof. In 2012, Joran was sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian prison for Stephanie's murder. For many, this confirmed what they had feared all along. Joran van der Sloot was not just a suspect in Natalee's disappearance. He was a dangerous man capable of unthinkable violence. The sentence in 2012 that sent Joran van der Sloot to prison for Stephanie Flores's death brought some measure of justice, but it could not erase the heartbreak of Natalee Holloway's disappearance. Then in 2021, Joran's crimes grew even darker. While already serving his time in Peru, he was caught smuggling cocaine into prison. For this, he was handed an additional 18 years behind bars. Still, under Peruvian law, no matter how many convictions a person receives, the maximum sentence is capped at 35 years unless it results in life imprisonment. That means Joran is currently expected to walk free on or around June 10, 2045, unless the law changes or other legal action is taken. For Natalee's family, his conviction in Peru for Stephanie's death only deepened their fears. The similarities between Stephanie's murder and Natalee's disappearance were too close to ignore. Beth Holloway and those who supported her had long believed Natalee's case was not an accident. They believed she had crossed paths with someone dangerous, and Stephanie's tragedy confirmed that suspicion. Joran's actions in Peru seemed to reflect what might have happened to Natalee. This gave Beth hope that Stephanie's case might finally lead to the answers she had been waiting for. And in time, it did, though not in the way anyone expected. In June 2023, Joran was temporarily extradited to Alabama. This time, he was not facing murder charges, but federal charges of wire fraud and extortion for the scam he had carried out against Beth in 2010, when he cruelly promised her Natalee's remains for money. What happened in court during that case changed everything. As part of a plea deal, Joran agreed to something called a proffer, which meant he had to tell the truth in full detail in exchange for a lighter sentence. During this process, Joran finally gave a confession about what really happened to Natalee. His words were horrifying. He admitted that on the night Natalee disappeared, he had made unwanted advances toward her while they were on the beach. Natalee rejected him and defended herself, kneeing him in the groin. Enraged, Joran kicked her in the face with full force, knocking her unconscious. In an act of brutal cruelty, he then grabbed a cinder block and struck her in the head repeatedly until she stopped moving. After that, he pushed her body into the ocean and walked away. His description was chilling, not just for the violence, but for the complete lack of emotion with which he spoke. He told prosecutors that after leaving Natalee's body in the water, he went home, checked soccer scores, took a shower, and went to school the next day, as if nothing had happened. His calm tone and total absence of remorse stunned everyone who heard him. Joran also made one thing clear. The Kalpoe brothers, who had been suspected for years, had nothing to do with Natalee's death. He admitted he acted completely on his own, finally clearing the brothers' names after years of suspicion. Beth Holloway later confirmed that Joran's confession was backed by a polygraph test, which gave it further credibility. The court accepted his plea agreement. For the crimes of wire fraud and extortion, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. This sentence runs alongside his existing sentence in Peru. But under the terms of the deal, if Joran is ever released in Peru, he will be brought to the United States to serve the remainder of his sentence there. After nearly 20 years of rumors, unanswered questions, and painful speculation, the truth was finally revealed. But the reality was even darker than anyone had imagined. The brutality of the crime, combined with the cold, emotionless way Joran described it, left the courtroom in shock. It was not only the violence that horrified people, it was his lack of humanity. Outside the federal courthouse, Beth Holloway stood with the truth she had fought for nearly 2 decades to uncover. The man who had once been only a suspect was no longer in question. He had confessed. "It's over," Beth said, her voice trembling but steady. Her eyes filled with tears as she declared, "Joran van der Sloot is no longer the suspect in my daughter's case. He is the one responsible. Joran van der Sloot is no longer just a suspect in my daughter's murder. He is the killer." Those words carried the weight of all the years she had spent searching, fighting, and refusing to give up. They were the words of a mother who had finally looked into the face of the man who had stolen her child's future. In court, Beth spoke directly to Joran. She told him plainly, "You are responsible. And I want you to remember that every time that jail cell door slams shut." She had listened to his confession with a strength that astonished many. He had described killing her daughter and then returning home as though nothing had happened. Now she looked at him one more time and said with unshaken honesty, "You look like hell, Joran." Judge Anna Monosco spoke to the courtroom with a clear and steady voice, making sure no one could mistake the seriousness of what had been revealed. She had read Joran's confession, she had listened to Beth Holloway's pain, and she responded with sharp honesty. She told him plainly that she considered his actions to be brutal, a deliberate act against Natalee Holloway. Then she reminded him of something that cut even deeper. He had taken the lives of not just one, but 2 young women. Both of them had done nothing more than reject his unwanted advances. Both had futures full of promise, and both had them stolen away in separate, years-apart tragedies. U.S. Attorney Prim Escalona also spoke during the hearing. Her words reflected the weight of nearly 20 years of suffering endured by Beth and her family. She said she could not imagine the heartache, the endless sleepless nights, and the countless tears that Beth must have cried. But in the same breath, she honored the unshakable determination that had carried the Holloway family through every setback. Their love for Natalee, she said, was the reason the truth was finally spoken in court. That love had brought them here, and Beth's strength had become a symbol for every mother who has ever searched for justice for her child. Natalee Holloway's story will never be forgotten. It is forever etched into America's memory, not only because of its heartbreaking ending, but because of the long and painful road it took to reach the truth. For almost 2 decades, Natalee's name was surrounded by mystery and unanswered questions. There were endless news reports, false leads, changing confessions, and a storm of speculation that left her case clouded in confusion. Her disappearance sparked books, documentaries, and worldwide debate. It exposed weaknesses in international investigations, created distrust of Aruban authorities, and revealed how easily powerful families could protect their own. What made it worse was the cruelty of the man responsible. For years, Joran played with Natalee's memory, taunted her family's grief, and manipulated the public's desperate need for answers. He lied for money. He exploited tragedy. And while the world searched for the truth, he carried on as though nothing had happened, even taking the life of another young woman in Peru. Even now, with his confession finally made, there are painful gaps that will never be filled. Natalee's body has never been recovered. There was no funeral, no headstone, no place for her family to visit. What remains are memories of who she was and the devastating ache of what she could have become. Beth Holloway herself said it best in court. She often imagines the Dr. Natalee would have been, the life she would have lived, and the difference she could have made. Today, Beth says she tries to focus on her son, cherishing his life in ways she couldn't before. For years, her search for answers consumed everything. Now, with the case finally solved, even in such a disturbing way, she is finding space to breathe, to appreciate the moments she still has. The resolution of Natalee's case did not come through a proper investigation or swift justice. It came decades later, tied to extortion and confessed only when it benefited the man who caused so much pain. And while the truth is now known, it is darker and more disturbing than anyone expected. Natalee Holloway's story is one that forces us to remember how fragile life is, how relentless a mother's love can be, and how justice, no matter how delayed, still matters. The truth, when it finally arrived, was far worse than anyone had imagined.